Right. Thank you to everyone for joining the National Center for Rural Road Safety for our Safe System Approach for Rural Areas webinar series. Today we're going to be doing part 1, introducing the Safe System Approach and Traffic Safety Culture. My name is Jamie Sullivan and I am the Director for the Rural Safety Center. Before we get started, we're just going to go through some of these poll questions. So we asked how you're joining us today. Most people, as always, are joining us via computer only. If you do have any audio issues, you can let us know through the chat pod and we will try and help you out. But one thing that we have learned through the last couple of years is that sometimes it's best to call in. So you'll notice that phone number, the 866 number, is located in the top left-hand corner of your screen in case you do need that. We also were wondering how many people are joining us from their location, and the great majority, well, I guess 100% of you are joining us by yourself. No surprise there. Due to COVID still, most people are not necessarily in their offices. What type of organization you're joining us from? We have about 19% from state transportation departments, about 19% from local transportation departments. We have 5% from LTAP. 11% from other federal, state, or local government agency, 11% from educational institution, 3% from a professional association, and 19% from private or consultant. And then as far as where you're joining us from, we have about 16% from the Northeast, 29% from the Southeast, 18% from the Midwest, 34% from the West, and about 3% from other. I'm going to go ahead and move us over to our presentation now. And it does look like our closed captionist is letting us know that for participants who are needing closed caption, if you could please look at the top of the screen and find the CC prompt. Please select Show Captions to display captions on your screen. In addition, some other webinar logistics for you. Our webinar will be an hour-and-a-half long. As always, it is being recorded and will be archived on our website within the next week. For quality of our recording, we have muted everyone during presentation. If you are listening on the phone, we would ask you to please mute your computer so you don't have any feedback. In addition, if you are looking to maximize the presentation on your screen, in the top right-hand corner, you will see a box with the little brackets around it. That will, if you click on that, it will make the presentation itself full screen. This may be useful during some of the graphics that will be shown today. It will get rid of all of the extraneous information on the outside, such as the chat box and the handout pod, just for the time being until you click it again. At the end of each section, of which there are 2 today, there will be time for question and answers with our speakers, and we will do poll questions for you as well. You don't need to feel like you need to hold on to your questions until we hit those sections. You are welcome to put those in the chat pod at any time, and as always, I will read those out to our presenters when we get to that question and answer period. Additionally, there is a handout pod in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen where you can download a PDF version of today's presentation. It will also be available on our website when we post the recording of today as well. Additionally, the follow-up surveys will be coming to assess our webinars. You will get one directly following today's webinar. If you do not get the survey link because it shows up in your junk mail instead of your inbox, the link is shown on your screen right now. This is also available, as I mentioned, in that PDF in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. That link will allow you to fill out the survey and request a certificate and CEU forms, which again take about 4 to 6 weeks after the webinar to arrive to you. We manually create those after the survey has completed. The CEU forms, as always, need to be returned to continuing@montana.edu and not the Safety Center, but there is a reminder of that on the form that will be emailed out to you. You may also request a verification of completion form, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And this will show all of the CEUs that you've been provided throughout any of our webinars or summits at Montana State University. Today's presenters, we're lucky to have 2 experts in the field to talk to us today. We have Mark Doctor, who is a Senior Safety and Geometric Design Engineer for the Federal Highway Administration's Resource Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Mark advances the use of innovative, flexible, and performance-based design practices on a national level and within FHWA safety and design disciplines, providing training and technical capacity building activities. Mark began his career with FHWA in 1988 and gained engineering experience through several positions in the FHWA Florida Division Office and former FHWA Region Office in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was the Regional Traffic Management and ITS Engineer. From 1998 to 2005, he served in the FHWA Tennessee Division as the Field Operations Team Leader and also the Safety and ITS Team Leader. Mark has served in his current position with the FHWA Resource Center Safety and Design Team since 2005, where he provides technical services in the areas of geometric design, intersection safety, innovative intersections, roundabouts, freeway interchange design, and the safe system approach. Mark is a registered professional engineer in the state of Georgia. Additionally, our second trainer will be Nic Ward, who is the director of the Center for Health and Safety Culture at Montana State University and a professor of Industrial and Management Systems Engineering in the I can't even say it, I'm sorry, Aspergerson College of Engineering at Montana State University. Professor Ward holds a PhD in Organizational Psychology or Human Factors from Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. In his role at the center, Professor Ward is responsible for creating a network of collaborators, creating a sustainable vision for the center, and aligning the center with the university's mission. He also serves as a principal investigator and provides leadership and expertise on multiple projects. Nic is an original member of the TRB Subcommittee on Roadway Safety Culture, co-author of the National Towards Zero Death Strategy, and a recognized international leader for advancement of traffic safety culture as the foundation for creating safe systems. So we're very excited to have them both with us today. Once you have completed the webinar, you'll have an understanding of the safe system approach and traffic safety culture and how they can be applied to rural areas. And we'll do this through 5 different learning outcomes. The first is to be able to list the 6 principles and 5 elements of the safe system approach. The second is to describe how the safe system approach is different from traditional road safety approaches. The third is to describe how you and your agency can begin today to plan and implement safe system concepts to improve safety on rural roads. The fourth is to understand the meaning of traffic safety culture. And the fifth is to recognize the role of traffic safety culture in the safe system approach in Vision Zero. And at this time, I'm proud to turn our webinar over to Mark Doctor. Mark?
All right, thank you, Jamie. Hopefully you can hear me okay. You're on mute is probably the most common words that we've heard all in the last year or so. So just want to do a sound check, make sure I'm okay here.
Yep, you are perfect.
All right, perfect. So thank you very much, Jamie. It's great to be here and introduce the safe system approach. And at FHWA, we say zero is our goal and the safe system is how we get there. Now, zero may seem like a long ways off, especially if you look at where we are currently. We've plateaued between 34 to 36,000 deaths a year and pedestrian fatalities even ticking on the way up. But behind each of these numbers is a tragedy, the people's lives and family, friends. So it's more than just statistics. We need to do better. We need to do things differently. And that's why I'm excited about the safe system approach, because it has been recognized as an international best practice. It had origins in Sweden back in the mid-90s, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand. They've all had great success by implementing this approach, and it helped them move off of their plateaus. So we're very hopeful that in the U.S. we can achieve similar results. So what I want to do is kick off with the basics, and we've already explained why we need a different approach, but I want to talk about what is the safe system approach, who's involved, how is it different from traditional approaches, and when can your agency or organization get started? And really the answer is almost immediately. So what is it? It's an approach, it's a concept, it's a philosophy, and so it can be somewhat nebulous. So I decided to create a word cloud. And all of these things can describe what the safe system approach is. It's holistic, it's a system level consideration, it's human focused. But I think more than anything, what it represents is a different way of thinking about the road safety problem. It acknowledges that as human beings, we will inevitably make mistakes, and on the road system, those mistakes can lead to crashes. So it's about managing the consequences of those inevitable crashes to keep them survivable. And we do that by managing the kinetic energy transferred to the human being during that collision. So the best way, I think, to go through what is the safe system approach is to utilize this pictograph that the FHWA has created with our 6 principles on the outer ring and the 5 elements of the safe system on the inner ring. So the first principle is one that I hope we can all agree with, and that is that death and serious injury on the roads is just not acceptable. And at the Federal Highway Administration and with our partner agencies, when we talk about safety and through our transportation performance management process, our safety goal, and we have 5 goals, what it really focuses on are fatalities, fatality rate, serious injuries, the serious injury rate, and the vulnerable user fatalities. Notice what is not on this list of measures, and that is crashes. The safe system approach is about eliminating death and serious injuries, not eliminating crashes. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. So let me challenge conventional thinking right off the bat here with a hypothetical or maybe not so hypothetical question. If you had the opportunity to implement something, a measure, a feature, a device, a process that reduced fatalities and serious injuries at intersections by 50%. But as a negative, as a consequence of that, you're going to double the total number of minor crashes. So let me think about this. You're going to actually double minor crashes by doing this action, but your deaths and serious injuries are going to go down. Would you do it? Well, under a safe system approach, absolutely, because that is the focus. The focus is on eliminating death and serious injuries. Now, yes, that there are actually examples of things that agencies can do or have done that may have resulted in an increase in total crashes, as the minor crashes. But if it results in a significant decrease in fatal and serious injury crashes, is it the right thing to do? Well, I would argue under the safe system approach, yes, absolutely. And if we think about it in terms of dollars and cents, well, many agencies do put a cost on different crash types. These numbers are actually somewhat old already, but no matter what value you use to quantify the cost of a crash, a fatal injury versus a minor property damage only crash, well, the trade-off is usually over 500 to 1. So yeah, sometimes these trade-offs are appropriate and are the right thing to do. And under the safe system approach, that is what we focus on, fatal and serious injuries. Now, we do know that crashes are almost inevitable because people make mistakes. Road users make mistakes. We will never get to perfection. Now we can try to reduce the likelihood of user error, and this is where human factors ties in. And for many years, we've done a lot of great research trying to better understand how humans operate in the road environment. And I want to put in a acknowledgement for a great reference that is perhaps underutilized in many cases, and that is through the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, the report 600 on human factors guidelines for practitioners. And you don't have to be a human factors expert to utilize this guide, and it gives good practical application of many of these human factors concepts. And the third principle is that as human beings, we are vulnerable. We have a certain tolerance to crash forces before harm occurs. And so under a safe system approach, designing for safety basically becomes an exercise in managing kinetic energy. Now, kinetic energy transfer is very complicated. There are a lot of factors involved, but if we try to simplify things, use the basic physical equation, 1/2 mass times the velocity squared, notice that velocity being a vector, has both a magnitude and direction. Magnitude being the speed that the vehicles are going, but the direction is the angle of impact. And that is very, very important. And we are learning quite a bit. This is research that was developed in Australia that took a closer look at the effect that impact angle has on transferred kinetic energy. And even if we cannot reduce speeds in a collision, if we can somehow alter the angle of impact, say instead of a 90-degree collision down to a 40-degree collision, it has about the same effect as if the speeds of the vehicles involved were traveling at about 20 miles per hour lower. So angle of impact plays a huge role. And I love to use roundabouts as a great example of this principle. So first of all, roundabouts at the very start have fewer conflict points, which are basically the potential for collisions to occur. You're not going to have the red light running T-bone type of crashes. And also the geometry of the roundabout on the approach, the splitter island is very effective at lowering speeds. But even if we take the worst case scenario of someone that approaches a roundabout and they do not slow down and they do not obey the traffic control device, let's say they blow right through the yield sign, well, the geometrics of the roundabout is such that if that collision occurs, the angle at which the vehicles are most likely to collide is going to be closer to 40 degrees than 90 degrees. So there are ways, there are things that we can do as transportation practitioners to manage kinetic energy. Now, just the other day, I pulled up the web link for this webinar series, and a great web page. Kudos to the Rural Road Safety Center for a very informative web page. But I happen to notice down here in the little "Did you know" box that 40% of crash fatality victims in rural areas were in vehicles that rolled over, and 70% were not wearing seat belts. Well, this is a hard lesson in kinetic energy right here. So yes, we do know that if a vehicle loses control and rolls over, the likelihood of that crash being more severe greatly increases. And very sadly, 70% of these victims not wearing seat belts. You know, national studies show that on average, about 90% of the U.S. population does wear a seat belt. Now, it varies from state to state, but if on average 90% of people in vehicles wear seat belts, it's only 10% that aren't. So that 10% represents 70% of our victims. Well, that is another hard lesson in kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is really what is the killer in our vehicular crashes. So it does pose an interesting question. Is there a maximum safe system speed? Well, I don't have the answer for you. I think possibly it's a good research topic, but what I can tell you is that we do know that since velocity is squared in the kinetic energy equation, it greatly increases kinetic energy with just a small increase in speed, especially on the high end range. So for example, compared to a 55 mile an hour speed of two colliding vehicles, if we just increase the speeds slightly, the kinetic energy increases tremendously. So we may think, oh, there's no big deal if I just raise speeds, say from 55 to 60 or 65 to 70. Well, true, it may only be a 5 mile an hour increment increase in speed, but the increase in kinetic energy is much, much more. And in fact, if we're raising speeds to 80 miles an hour, that's over twice the kinetic energy compared to 55 miles an hour. We need to think differently about speeds because really it's about kinetic energy. And remember back when, and yeah, I'm actually old enough to remember my grandmother's car, an old Chevy, actually had a speedometer similar to this, where kind of in the middle, the numbers are all crunched together. But on the edges, they're kind of far apart. You may remember vehicles like this. You know, nowadays we're used to a speedometer looking more uniform across. Hypothetically, what if a speedometer was set to resemble kinetic energy? Well, it resembles something more like this, and maybe that would influence choices in a different way. It's more than just speed management, it's really kinetic energy management. So getting back to the principles of a safe system, the fourth principle is sharing responsibility. And you may recall the 4 E's of safety: education, enforcement, engineering, and EMS. Well, they are now integrated into what we call the 5 elements of a safe system. And it's important to acknowledge that to achieve a safe system, we cannot do it through one element alone. It cannot be done solely through engineering or solely through safe roads. It really is a collective effort of all of the elements together. And being proactive. Well, traditionally, if a crash occurs, as practitioners, we go out and try to see if there was some countermeasure or some improvement that we could make. Well, what if we could go back in time before the crash occurred and actually identify the risks of the roadway and try to mitigate those risks by implementing safety measures? Well, that is exactly what we try to do under the systemic approach to safety. It's about being proactive, identifying risk features, and trying to address those risk features, even if they're at locations where we don't have a history of collisions. That is exactly what the systemic approach is, and it's something that the FHWA has been promoting for several years now. So for more information, I encourage folks to please visit our systemic approach website. And we encourage agencies to take a blend between investing your resources both to address hotspot locations or high crash locations, but also proactively looking at systemic risks along our roadways. And then providing redundancy, the final principle in the safe system approach. I like to think of it like this, and I'm going to draw upon James Reason's model of the Swiss cheese model. Mr. Reason, a psychology professor in England, and he describes using Swiss cheese as an analogy, where the holes of each piece of cheese represents weaknesses in the various elements of the system. So if you think of a transportation safe system with the road user and safe vehicles and safe roads and speeds, all of those have weaknesses. Now we can try to strengthen them, and that can be represented by reducing the size of the hole. But we have to remember that collectively as a system, if we strengthen all the elements, that is the trick to avoid a failure in the system. And a failure would be a fatality or serious injury outcome. So another way to think of it is, well, let's start with safe road users. And we know that people aren't perfect. They will never be perfect. And so we can put some holes in that line of defense. Well, safe vehicles and safe vehicle technology has really increased in recent years. We have things that keep us from getting in a crash in the first place, maybe something like a lane departure warning system. Or if we are in a crash, safety measures like curtain airbags can help make the crash more survivable. But we know that safe vehicles aren't perfect, so safe speeds. Well, if we were traveling at a safe speed, it can reduce the kinetic energy of that collision. But we know that's not the case, so we put some weaknesses in that element. Well, safe roads. If a collision occurs, maybe we have a safe roadside, a clear zone, no hazards that were hit, so it makes the crash more survivable. And then the final line of defense is post-crash care, getting rapid emergency medical response. And in a rural area, this can be a substantial weakness and maybe a critical area to focus on, because I do view that as sort of the last line of defense, getting timely emergency medical services out there. Because hopefully what we want to do is return the user back into this pool of safe road users. So the elements work collectively, they work in synergy, and under the safe system approach, we really have to focus on strengthening all of them, because one element by itself will not get it done. So what's different about the safe system approach? It can be subtle, and sometimes I like to draw an analogy to the children's games of spot the difference between these two figures. And if you just glance at it real quickly, they may look the same. But when you look closely, you start to see the subtle differences between the images. Well, it's a paradigm shift, really, with the safe system approach. So instead of a focus on reducing crashes, it's about eliminating fatalities and serious injuries. Subtle but very important difference, and it ties in with the principles that death and serious injuries are unacceptable, but also acknowledging that human beings will make mistakes, and those mistakes can lead to crashes. Crashes are likely going to happen. It's about making it more survivable. So a focus on kinetic energy management, which is really more than just speed management. And that ties in with the principle that humans are vulnerable. The 4 E's of safety are tied into the 5 elements of the safe system. It is a shared responsibility among the system. It does start with safe road users, but we're not expecting perfection. And we're also not trying to necessarily blame or attribute a cause of a crash as much as we are trying to strengthen all parts of the system. And we do that hopefully proactively. A systemic approach ties in with the principle that safety can be proactive. And rather than trying to identify those deficiencies, we want to strengthen all parts of the system, provide that critical redundancy. And then lastly, instead of thinking about it in terms of a balancing between safety and mobility, we really can only have safe mobility. So all of these principles are captured in some FHWA materials. We have a brochure that captures this available from our FHWA webpage. Some also good material. We've got a guide on integrating the safe system approach into the Highway Safety Improvement Program, as well as some other new materials on Vision Zero action plans. Another new product from FHWA is our initial version of a safe system assessment framework for intersections. And it's based upon these principles of trying to simplify user decisions, trying to reduce or eliminate the severe conflict points among all users, including pedestrians, reducing impact speeds, and managing collision angles. So for various intersection choices, I've already mentioned roundabouts, but there are other innovative intersection designs that also have advantages in these regards. And so this is a assessment framework to help practitioners hopefully make better informed project decisions. And we encourage agencies to consider integrating the Safe System framework into a intersection control evaluation, or ICE, process, which is a 2-stage screening process. And really the safe system assessment would come into the stage 1 on the screening approach. Another FHWA product talks about the safe system assessment or safe system framework as it specifically applies to pedestrians and bicyclists. This is a new publication that recently came out. So most of us are probably interested in the safe roads and safe speeds elements of a safe system. And so for safe roads, it's really a 2-pronged approach. First, we try to reduce the risk of an error occurring in the first place, and that can be done through strategies like separating user groups that may have incompatible speeds. If vehicular speeds are high, we don't want to mix various user groups. Under a low speed setting, yes, we can have a mixing of the user groups. So context and speed is critical. But when necessary, we may need to separate user groups in space physically. Or if we can't do that, can we separate them in time? So think about an intersection and maybe something like providing an exclusive pedestrian walking phase or a leading pedestrian interval. Or another strategy is to increase the attentiveness and awareness of the user groups to hopefully minimize the likelihood of an error being committed in the first place. But then when a crash does occur, it's about managing the kinetic energy, and we can do that by managing speed, impact angles, and also our roadside barriers and devices are also examples of ways we minimize kinetic energy. So safe speeds. Now it is important to recognize that, yes, some roads can be engineered to accommodate higher speeds. If we have forgiving roadsides, if we have no hazards, think in terms of a rural freeway in flat areas. Well, yeah, that can accommodate safe speeds or higher speeds. But many of our roads, and probably most of our network, are not designed to accommodate those higher speeds. So under a safe system approach, it's best to think about it as not trying to necessarily universally reduce speeds. It's more about matching speeds to what is appropriate given the roadway conditions that exist. And I like to draw on this analogy that is part of the safe system approach is applied in New Zealand, and in their speed management guide they talk about this in greater detail, but they place their road network into essentially three buckets. One is what they call self-explaining roads. These are corridors where road users are already traveling at safe and appropriate speeds. The safety performance is good. These are roads that help lend credibility to posted speed limits. So those are not the problems. In fact, those are what we should be striving for, those self-explaining roads. The other category is what they call engineer up. So these are, say, high priority corridors where maybe higher speeds are desirable. Maybe they're higher freight networks, and they're roadways where the existing conditions are not supportive of higher speeds. So these are the priorities for investing engineering improvements, engineering up. Or in the urban context, it can be the other way, where we're trying to change the look of the road to try to promote lower speeds. But in either way, it's a case of engineering to change the roadway to match what the desirable speed is. And then the third bucket is what they call challenging conversations. So these are the elements of our system, or their system, where speeds aren't compatible with what is safe and desirable. And for whatever reason, lack of resources, not enough time to update the whole system, that there's nothing on the horizon to change the roadway. So these challenging conversations are where law enforcement is emphasized, and where education of the public as to why a speed limit is posted in a given way is such. So challenging conversations, and challenging, it's important to recognize it certainly is challenging. But I think this is a very interesting way of thinking about how we can try to look for those parts of our system where a different action perhaps is needed. Now, speed management, there's no easy way to sugarcoat it. It is a challenge. If you visit our FHWA webpage on speed management, there's all kinds of great resources and references out there to give you tools and advice. One in particular is a recent publication that was a joint effort between FHWA and ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and it's very comprehensive on speed management and noteworthy speed management practices. So a great reference on speed management. So that is an overview of the safe system approach, what it is, what the principles are, and in terms of what's next, I love to draw upon this quote from a resource that was produced by the International Transport Forum, and it acknowledges that there is no single pathway to implementing a safe system. It's a learning by doing process, but by following the principles and adhering to those general concepts, it is a way to greatly see advances in helping to eliminate death and serious injury from our roads. So with that, I'll leave you with I know you have these slides, and two web pages that I would encourage folks to visit: our FHWA web page, as well as the ITE Safe System Resources page. ITE does a fantastic job of keeping that populated and up to date with the latest and greatest materials. So with that, Jamie, I hope we have some time for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. I know I learned a lot more. I love all the examples that you just shared, especially the ones about rural and roundabouts. And so with that, if anyone has any questions for Mark, we'll take them on the left-hand side in the chat pod now. You can go ahead and type those in. In the meantime, I am going to move us over to our very first poll break to check our learning outcomes with everyone. So the first question that we have for you is, which of the following is not one of the 6 principles of the safe system approach? So again, which one is not one of the 6 principles? Death and serious injury is unacceptable. Humans make mistakes. humans are vulnerable, responsibility is shared, technology must be used, safety is proactive, redundancy is crucial, or I don't know, I don't remember. The next question that we have for you is a safe system has 5 elements, including a safe road, a safe system has 5 elements, including safe road users, safe vehicles, safe roads, post-crash care, and which of the next ones is the 5th? Is it technology, safe speeds, fatalities, none of the above, I don't know, I don't remember. Our third question is a true or false question, and it is one way a safe system approach differs from a traditional approach is that the focus is on eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes rather than all crashes, true or false. And then if you've joined us for some of our other webinars in the past, you'll know that we do a challenge question as well. So from this section of the webinar, we're looking to know what is one action item you'd consider implementing in your own jurisdiction. And so we would ask you to go ahead and write that down for your reference in the future for yourself, but then also if you wouldn't mind sharing your answer with us in this poll pod, we'd love to know that as well. And so we'll give everyone just a few seconds here to fill out all of the questions, and then we'll have Mark respond to them. And again, if anyone has any questions, if you could please put those in the chat pod. I do see that we have someone asking for Mark's email. I will put that in the chat pod for you, and then it will show up again at the very end of our webinar after our second speaker has also gone. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to go ahead and close out these polls and broadcast the results for you to be able to see, so you can go ahead and address these questions.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, so it looks like most folks got the question about which is not a principle, and it's correct. We certainly talk about technology, but technology must be used is not specifically stated as a principle, but certainly technology is embedded, I would say, in all of the 5 elements, certainly with safer vehicles, but also things that we can do with safer roads, and also things that can promote safe speeds. So, yep, technology is important, but is correct that it's not specifically one of the principles that we address. The others are, and glad to see that vast majority of folks. The other question on the 5 elements, and safe roads, safe vehicles, post-crash care, safe road users, and safe speeds. Certainly being one that kind of brings them all together almost. But I like to think of the elements as lines of defense, and they do work together. They work collectively, and certainly a focus on having appropriate speeds is a critical part of the safe system approach. So great. And one way a safe system approach differs from traditional is the focus on eliminating fatal and serious injuries. And glad to see overwhelmingly most people agree with that. True, because it is. It's not to say that we don't care about minor crashes. I mean, let's face it, nobody wants to be in a crash, right? It will ruin your day. But if it's a minor crash and you can walk away from it, you can get your car repaired, or you can get a new car. You can't get a new body. And so whereas a minor fender bender will ruin your day, it won't ruin your life. And that's really the focus of the safe system approach, is on things that we can do to eliminate the more severe crashes and the severe outcomes. And then the last challenge, the challenge question, action items that you would consider. Great to see so many responses in there, and please keep typing away. The speed limit review, safer roads, more advanced workshops and training. Yes, that's great. Arguably we are going from this awareness building phase into a practitioner type of phase. And I'm glad that someone typed in there that they want to look into the safe system assessment framework for intersections, because that is a great starting point for actually beginning to implement safe system considerations in project decision making. And another tool or product that FHWA is in the process of helping develop is something like a road safety audit from a safe system perspective. So we are continuing to expand the tools in our toolbox to try to implement safe system concepts into our decision-making process, and double down on the tools that we already have. So I'm glad someone typed in the box about how they're already doing a systemic analysis of their roadway system. That is fantastic, because being proactive in safety is so critical. So fantastic, and glad to see the shared responsibility that is also so critical. The partnerships that are necessary. Really, the safe system approach to me is about those 6 fundamental principles, but also the partnerships that we need to strengthen the 5 elements. So thank you for responding to those poll questions, and I especially love the responses in the challenge box. That is fantastic. So thank you, Jamie. I'll turn it back over to you.
Perfect. So Mark, we do have one question that came in for you, and that is, does a safe system approach support connected vehicle generated alerts of pedestrians adjoining and crossing roadways?
Excellent question, and yes, absolutely. So as vehicle safety technology continues to advance, things like front warning and pedestrian warnings, or things like automated braking systems that can kick in, all of these technological advancements and improvements to make vehicles safer definitely tie into the safe system approach. Think about what I mentioned about reducing the holes in the cheese, the weaknesses. So by doing things like improving vehicle safety technologies, it can help compensate for weaknesses in the other elements. So it all works together, and it has to work collectively. So yes, we are very hopeful that vehicle safety technology advancements will continue in the future. They're most likely to, and so that is a big advantage or attribute toward us reaching this vision of 0 deaths and serious injuries. So great point. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And now we're going to move in having Nic Ward talk a little bit more about the traffic safety culture. So Nic? Nic, is your phone muted? Dana, can you check and see if the beep that we just heard someone entering might have been Nic?
I think you're back. Are you there, Nic?
I am back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, everybody. Sorry for the technical problems. Thank you, Mark, for a great presentation. It really made it clear what the safe system approach is. And what I want to do with my portion of this webinar is talk a bit about traffic safety culture, which is something I'm sure people have heard about, and how it relates to the safe system approach, and how it all three, or safe system approach and traffic safety culture, relate to this notion of Vision Zero. We've heard a lot of these 3 concepts lately: safe systems, traffic safety culture, and Vision Zero. and I thought it'd be useful to spend some time on understanding how those three concepts relate and support each other, and in particular, what is the role of traffic safety culture. So to start with, I wanted to talk about a type of belief, and as we'll see in a bit, we can define traffic safety culture as our shared beliefs. And that includes beliefs shared amongst road users, but also beliefs shared amongst traffic safety stakeholders, such as state and local departments of transportation. One kind of belief is called an assumption. And an assumption is what we believe about the system, things that we take to be true about how the system works. So we can talk about how the transportation system works as one of our beliefs as an assumption. And that's different than we may have about beliefs about specific behaviors. So for example, we may think that speeding is fun or speeding gets us to our destination more quickly. That's a belief about a specific behavior. But we can also have beliefs or assumptions about the system in which the beliefs take place. So we can assume that traffic laws are necessary for a safe system. We can assume that enforcement of those laws is important to have them adhered to. And Mark talked about some assumptions that relate to the safe system approach, or what he called principles. And I want to focus a few of those assumptions. There's beliefs about how the safe system works. And it's important to reflect on those assumptions because our willingness to engage in the safe system approach and our success in using the safe system approach may depend on how strongly we believe in those assumptions or principles. So here are some of the assumptions that underlie the original Swedish Vision Zero model. And I want to share three with you. And for each of those assumptions, some you'll recognize from Mark's presentation, I want you to sort of think about how strongly you agree or disagree with each of those particular assumptions. Dana, do you want to lead this part, or do I keep doing it?
Give one click and then I'll glide your poll in. There we go.
There we go. So the first assumption is no one should be killed or seriously injured while using the roadway transportation system. So that's a belief or an assumption about the roadway transportation system. To what extent do you agree or disagree with that particular assumption? We'll just give it another minute or so. So you should all see the results right now to that first assumption. No one should be killed or seriously injured while using the roadway transportation system. The first thing I want you to notice is that there's some disagreement. There is variation in how much this group attending this webinar agree. It's not unanimous. So we certainly have the majority agreeing, 39% agreeing with this assumption, and 53%, just over the majority, strongly agreeing with it. But there are a few people who are neutral or disagree with it. So if this assumption is part of the Vision Zero model or the safe system approach, if we don't all agree with it, it's difficult to engage and be successful in implementing this particular approach to traffic safety. Because these assumptions are fundamental to the safe system approach and the ultimate goal of Vision Zero, in order to engage and sustain these efforts, we need to all be aligned and agree with these particular assumptions. So let's go to the next one. Roadway users should not be killed or seriously injured as a result of making mistakes and violating the rules and regulations of the roadway transportation system. So a variation on the first assumption, no one should be injured or killed because of making mistakes. I think we're probably there. So a similar pattern of results. Again, you'll see variation in how much agree with it. It's not a unanimous, we all agree with this assumption underlying the original Swedish Vision Zero model and assumptions that are also part of the safe system approach. There is some variability in how much we agree with it. 39% agreeing, 32% strongly agreeing, which is lower than the 53% we had for no one should be seriously injured or killed on a roadway transportation system, and a few more people being neutral or disagreeing with that assumption. Let's try the last one. Designers of the roadway transportation system are ultimately responsible for the deaths and serious injuries occurring in this system. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this principle? I think we're probably there for that one too. So this one's interesting. Again, variability in how much this group of people agree or disagrees with this particular assumption of the original Swedish Vision Zero model. This is an assumption of the original Vision Zero model, and we have a lot of disagreement with it. And one of the fundamental assumptions of the Vision Zero model in Sweden is that all designers, all people who have a role in the transportation system, ranging from traffic engineers to driving educators to emergency services, all have a responsibility for what happens on the roadway that they're responsible for. So it's a shared responsibility assumption. Okay, Dan, if we can remove that. So I want to introduce and show you these three assumptions just so you can see several things. First, we don't all necessarily agree equally with these assumptions. And one of the aspects of culture is the idea of shared beliefs. And if we're trying to adopt a model like safe systems and achieve a vision like zero, the safe system approach and the Vision Zero target have certain assumptions. And until we can share and align, all agree with the underlying assumptions, it may be difficult for us to embark on this journey to use the safe system approach and be successful in implementing our Vision Zero strategy. And I bring this up because we often think about traffic safety culture in terms of the culture of road users. Why are they not wearing their seatbelts? Why are they driving drunk? But traffic safety culture also relates to our organizational culture and how we, as traffic safety stakeholders, what's our cultural beliefs and how do they influence the actions we decide to take or not take? And if we want to move forward in a concerted, sustainable way with a Vision Zero target using the safe system model, we need to think about how much does our organization really share agreement with the key assumptions underlying Vision Zero as a target and safe systems as a framework for being successful with that Vision Zero. So we're here today talking about the safe system approach, and Mark showed a prettier graphic than mine representing what the safe system approach is and the various elements in it: safer roads, speed management, safer vehicles, and safer people. And when we talk about traffic safety culture, we often focus, as I just said, on the culture of road users, safer people. And we include people and making them safer in the safe system approach because we know historically, looking at crash data, this is some recent NHTSA study looking at the, quote, critical reasons for crashes in terms of the driver, the vehicle, the environment. Lots of studies show that the driver, you can debate the actual number, but relatively speaking, the road user is usually the most common critical reason for a crash. So we recognize that to get to vision 0, we need to really shift that contribution of the road user. Now, one unfortunate side effect of this kind of data is blaming the road user, which can lead to the assumption that we can't get to 0 because the road user is always going to be making mistakes, or there's nothing we can do because it's always the road user's fault for the particular crashes. So this is the Safe System Consortium, which really recently put together some guidelines and recommendations for moving forward with the Safe System approach, really targeted this sort of historical, perhaps, assumption that crashes are the fault of the victim, are the fault of the person, the road user involved in the crash. Which is one kind of assumption that may come out of the data I previously showed you, that the road user is the most critical reason for crashes. It's an unfortunate interpretation of that data, and it could lead to the assumption that crashes are the fault of the victim, and therefore there's little we can do if these road users are making mistakes. And that's one of the important shifts in the Safe System approach, is to counteract this form of thinking and to recognize that road users make mistakes as fallible humans, not as a fault-blaming activity, but as something that we embrace as being part of being inherently human, and that we as designers and managers of roadway systems are responsible for accommodating that, not using it as a blaming mechanism. And in fact, we can see that the perception that road users are at fault because they're the most common critical reason for crashes is somewhat misleading, because as this graph shows, a lot of these factors, the road user, the road environment, the vehicle, they all interact with each other. So we have, for example, this is data, percentile data taken from an American and British study that shows, for example, in the US, 27% of crashes involve the combined factors of a road user doing something in relation to a hazardous road environment. And you can see the various combinations, and then you can tally up how often was the road user either alone or in combination interacting with other factors a critical reason in a crash. And that's where you get the 95, 94% total. But the truth is in the details, that quite often the road user is doing something because they're interacting with the road environment or the vehicle, such as weather conditions, roadway conditions, or the conditions of the vehicle. So it's not true to say the road user is 95% responsible for crashes. What is true is that the road user is probably the most predominant factor, but quite often what the road user does that causes a crash is a result or an interaction with the road environment or the vehicle. So it's a combination of factors, not always just the individual factor. So, road users make mistakes. Road users are, relatively speaking, the largest critical reason for crashes. How do we change their behavior so they're safer? Well, here we're talking about intentional behavior, behavior that's planned, behavior that people are willing to do and intend to do in the future. How do we change road user behavior? Well, it's not really magic. We need to understand why that behavior takes place. We need to consider some psychology behind the behavior. Why are road users making those decisions? And there's several factors that lead to behavior. One is biology. Our biology drives certain of our behaviors. When we're hungry, we eat. When we're tired, we sleep. Our psychology also influences our behavior. If we have a risk-taking personality, a sensation-seeking personality, we're more likely to engage in risk-taking behavior. We react to our environment. So if we feel that we're in a dangerous environment, we may behave more safely. If we feel we're on an open stretch of roads where a higher speed seems acceptable or possible, we may drive faster. And the last one is recognizing that we're social beings. Most humans are inherently social. We belong, we need to belong to social groups, and we're influenced by our social environment. We make decisions based on what we think others expect of us, for example. And that's something we tend to ignore in traffic safety. What is the role of the social environment, which includes traffic safety culture? And that will be the focus of what I'm talking about for the remainder of this presentation. So the premise behind all this is traffic safety culture is that as social beings, some of our behavior is influenced by our social environment in general, and specifically the culture of the groups that we belong to, because our membership in those groups makes it necessary, in a sense, for us to adhere to the culture that define those groups. So if we can understand the culture and what parts of the culture are influencing behavior, maybe we can transform the culture of those groups to influence and encourage safer behavioral choices. And as social beings, why is culture important to us? Well, first of all, belonging to groups, how we define ourselves in terms of the groups we belong to, is critical for our own self-identity. We tend to define ourselves in terms of the groups we belong to. So you can imagine, play the mental exercise of how you would describe yourself to a stranger. At some point in that conversation, you may say you work for, or you belong to, or my family lives in. We tend to see ourselves and define our identity in terms of the groups we belong to. And belonging to groups is critical to our sense of security, our sense of confidence, our sense of wholeness. And as a result, we try and do things that we think our group culture accepts, and we try to avoid things we think our group culture would reject. We want to do things that foster and grow, increase acceptance by the groups we want to belong to, and we try and avoid things that we would think would lead these groups to push us out, because being out of a group is inherently psychologically painful to us as social beings. And historically, it's been argued that culture is important for our cooperation and survival. Belonging to groups and sharing the same beliefs and values and expectations lets us work better together and survive in our environment. And this may have been especially important way back when, but it's still important now. Sharing culture, that means sharing the same values and beliefs, lets us cooperate and function more effectively in harmony with the people within our group, and helps us respond better to our environment as a group rather than just relying on ourselves as individuals to contend with the environment. So how do we define traffic safety culture? Well, in the literature, culture is defined in terms of three aspects. First of all, the artifacts of a group. What does a group produce? Art, utensils, policies, laws. Also defined in terms of behaviors. What do they do? What are their rituals? How much does the population drink and drive or consume drugs? And the beliefs, what the group internalized, thinks about, believes in terms of those behaviors and artifacts. What beliefs lead to those behaviors and artifacts? And looking at the literature defining culture, culture has grown to include all three of those things. Culture is the shared beliefs, the common behaviors, and the artifacts typically produced by a group of people. Now, we're using culture, certainly in transportation, as a way of explaining risky behavior and crashes, trying to predict when risky behaviors and crashes may happen so that we can reverse engineer and create strategies to change culture so that we don't have risky behaviors and traffic crashes. But when you consider culture being beliefs, behaviors, and artifacts, there's very little left to explain or predict. What is there other than artifacts, behaviors, and beliefs? So we've had to change that a little bit to recognize what we're really trying to do is to change road user behavior. If that's true, then road user behavior needs to be separate from culture. So what we focus on in the center is that culture are shared beliefs amongst a group of people, which, whoops, that's not going to work. Culture are the shared beliefs amongst a group of people which influence behaviors and artifacts. The shared beliefs that influence whether a group wears their seatbelt or not, the shared beliefs that influence whether a state DOT implements a primary seatbelt law or not, we're focusing on the shared beliefs as the definition of culture so that we can explain and predict and develop strategies to change behaviors and change artifacts, for example, getting different policies put in place. So we've got these three terms now that you've heard today: Vision Zero, Safe System Approach, and Traffic Safety Culture. Mark shared a definition of the Safe System Approach. Let me start by putting a definition of traffic safety culture that we use in our center. Traffic safety culture encompasses the shared values, assumptions that we began talking about, and beliefs that influence not only road user behaviors, wearing a seatbelt or not, but also stakeholder actions, how their culture as an organization influences policies and laws around seatbelt laws and seatbelt enforcement. The Safe System Approach, as we heard from Mark, is a holistic view that provides a framework where everyone shares responsibility for traffic safety. And the other term, Vision Zero, is the goal to get to zero fatalities and serious injuries, which implies a moral declaration that zero is the only acceptable number of traffic fatalities and serious injuries. So to move forward and work together, it's useful to have common language. What do we mean by Vision Zero? A shared definition. What do we mean by the Safe System Approach? A shared definition. And what do we mean by traffic safety culture? A shared definition. But how do they relate to each other? How do these three concepts relate to each other? So by our way of thinking, we see Vision Zero as our target. That is our measure of success. And the Road to Zero Coalition has this graphic, which you can't see, I admit, but it's essentially projecting by 2050 we're down to zero traffic fatalities. And there's a number of pillars, a number of categories of strategy that the Road to Zero Coalition thinks are necessary for us to get to zero. The first is to double down on what works, which Mark mentioned. Accelerating advanced technology is number two. And the third is to prioritize safety, to create a traffic safety culture where traffic safety is not one of our priorities, it is the priority. And part of that is to adopt the Safe System Approach. So the Safe System Approach in creating a traffic safety culture which endorses and sustains the Safe System Approach is one of the key strategies that the Road to Zero Coalition's identified for Vision Zero. So Vision Zero is our target, and the Safe System Approach is our framework for getting to zero. And moving backwards, traffic safety culture is our foundation. We need a strong, positive traffic safety culture so that we're willing to make the effort and to believe in Vision Zero and to adapt how we work so that we can all participate within the Safe System Approach. So traffic safety culture, creating a positive traffic safety culture, is the foundation of our efforts for several reasons. One, we need a strong, positive traffic safety culture so that we embrace and believe in Vision Zero as our moral imperative. We need a traffic safety culture that recognizes innovation and the need to step out of our silos and work together collaboratively. And of course, as we're more familiar with, to look at the traffic safety culture within our road users and see how we can develop new strategies that transform road users' traffic safety culture to help get this element of the safe system, which is safer people. So as an example of using traffic safety culture to increase, to grow a more positive traffic safety culture amongst a group of road users, I want to give you an example here of a project we did with Utah called Together for Life, and you can go to this website and look at some of the materials that we did. But basically, when you do a traffic safety culture strategy, you don't assume what a group of people's culture is. You have to go and measure it. And one tool for measuring shared beliefs is a survey, because we can't see beliefs. We have to use tools that allow a person to externalize and share their beliefs. So we used a survey in a number of rural communities in Utah to see what were some strong elements of their existing culture. And one of the strong elements was people who they cared about, they wanted them to be safe. So this value of prioritizing and wanting people we care about to be safe was something almost everyone shared in these rural communities. So we created a campaign that leveraged that value. We connected wearing a seatbelt and asking people to wear their seatbelt. We connected those two behaviors, and it's important to see this too, wear your seatbelt, but also ask others to wear their seatbelt. That's two behaviors we're trying to grow here. And we connected that to the fact that everybody feels they want their loved ones protected and safe. So we connected the values to the behaviors, so doing this behavior aligned and was supported by the strong culture in these rural communities. And this was a campaign that we put in several rural communities, rural counties in Utah, and compared them to rural counties that did not get this strategy program implemented. So here's sort of the logic diagram of what we did. And it's important to understand the logic behind what you're trying to do so you can understand what's working and what's not. So here we basically have this notion of the social environment and a belief system that's shared, values, beliefs, and assumptions within a community, which influences the willingness and intention of the individuals in that community to engage in a behavior, which could be safe or dangerous and lead to a crash. And in this case, we're talking about increasing seatbelt use and asking others to wear their seatbelt when they're in a vehicle with you. And of course, the things we can do in the safe system approach in terms of improving the roadway, so a crash is less likely to be fatal, or improving EMS so people can get more quickly to a rural crash to minimize the chance an injury becomes fatal. We can also look at enforcement, which traditionally is a way of disincentivizing dangerous behavior and trying to get people to shift their willingness and intention to do things that are prohibited by law. But the interesting thing in rural communities is okay, it's not going to stay up. The interesting thing about rural communities is they tend to be less influenced by enforcement than non-rural communities. So we needed to think of other strategies that could work here, and this is why we developed this cultural-based strategy. So we put this campaign forward, connecting the value of protecting loved ones, which is a strong, predominant attribute of the rural culture in Utah, and we looked at how their behavior and attitudes and beliefs changed. So before the campaign, 78% strongly agreed they want people they care about to always wear a seatbelt. That went up to 86% after the campaign. So we actually grew and strengthened agreement with that value. Next, 52% of drivers reported they always made sure everyone in their car wore a seatbelt. That went up after the campaign slightly. 58% were asking everyone in their vehicle to wear a seatbelt. And fine. Sorry, everybody. Try this one more time.
Sorry, Nick. Adobe doesn't always play very well with the animation.
No, I'm going to write them a very stern letter. So after the campaign, observed seatbelts increased 20%, but only 7% in the control counties. So we had relatively speaking, a 13% increase in seatbelt use as a result of this culture-based strategy. So culture-based strategies are another tool, not meant to replace the other things we do, but one more tool we can bring to the Safe System Toolkit. The last thing I want to talk about is what can we do within our own organizations of stakeholders to apply the traffic safety culture approach. And the first thing we need to do is to examine our own culture. It will be difficult for us, as I've alluded to already, to be effective with Vision Zero and to embrace the Safe System approach unless our own culture aligns with the assumptions of those Vision Zero target Safe System approach. So do we prioritize safety? Really? Do we really do it? We say it, but do we really do it? Do we encourage innovation, or are we conservative and want the quick answers rather than the more difficult solutions? Do we all believe in Vision Zero? Do we really believe it's possible? it's hard to be effective with Vision Zero if half the organization are skeptical about it. So there's work we need to do as organizations, as leaders in organizations, to transform our own internal traffic safety culture to fully endorse and support Vision Zero and safe systems approach if those are the way we want to go. Do we see the value of collaboration? Do we really see how the safe system approach can move us forward? Do we see the benefits? Do we believe it's possible? Do we see a path forward adopting the safe system approach? Do we know how to contact the other stakeholders in our state, for example? Consider the logic of the strategies that you use. Sometimes we use strategies because we always have, or they're popular. But do we really understand the logic of why a strategy should work? Do we know how a strategy is effective? What mechanisms are making it effective? So thinking about coming up with logic diagrams for how our strategies are meant to work, and then evaluating them to see if they did work and if those mechanisms were the reason for the success. That enables us to make more rational, more effective strategies, and it gives us the information to share our success with other stakeholder groups so they can adopt them too. And finally, within the safe system approach, trying to create safer people, to recognize we need to do all the things we already do that help people be safer, but we also need to look at how we can use traffic safety culture as another foundation to create more tools to help us be successful in creating safer people and sustaining them as being safe in our particular communities. Putting in speed bumps may make people slow down on that piece of road, but the function of traffic safety culture, creating a positive traffic safety culture, is to have people not speed, not because of speed bumps, because speeding is something we don't do in our community because we're trying to keep everyone safe, because everyone in our community is important to us. And then figuring out how do you start growing a positive traffic safety culture, both within your organization and within your communities. And with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Nick. So again, I'll remind everyone we have the chat pod over on the left-hand side. I do see a few questions in there, and we'll read those out to Nick here in a second. We do have a few more poll questions for you all. The first one is, true or false, traffic safety culture encompasses the shared values, assumptions, and beliefs that influence road user behaviors and stakeholder actions. The next one is, what is the role of traffic safety culture in the safe system approach and Vision Zero? Is it the foundation, the framework, the target, I don't know, or I don't remember? And again, our challenge question from this section of the webinar, is there something that you would take back to your agency and something that you'd look to implement? Again, we'd have you write those down just as action items for yourself, but if you wouldn't mind sharing them, we'd love to see them here as well. So we'll give everyone just a couple seconds. Okay, and it does look like most people have gone ahead and answered, so I'm going to close these polls and broadcast the results for you, Nick.
Thank you, Jamie. So the first question, traffic safety culture encompasses the shared values, assumptions, and beliefs that influence road user behavior and stakeholder action. True, nearly everyone got that one correct. That is our definition that we use in our work at the Center with Traffic Safety Culture. The second question was talking about what is the role of traffic safety culture in the safe system approach in Vision Zero. We had the discussion around traffic safety culture, safe system approach, and Vision Zero. And here we have a little bit of variability, which goes back to my earlier point that these three terms are very similar. Maybe sometimes there's confusion about how they're different and how they relate to each other. The way we look at it, traffic safety culture is the foundation. You need to have a strong traffic safety culture in order to be successful in adopting the safe system approach and in establishing a robust Vision Zero. So traffic safety culture is the foundation, safe system approach is the framework, and our vision is Vision Zero.
Perfect, thank you. And it does look like our challenge question wasn't working, so we have fixed that. And I'm going to leave this particular screen open in case anyone would like to type in answers into that challenge question. Again, that is from this section of the webinar, what's one action item you'd consider implementing in your jurisdiction? And we have a few notes, not necessarily questions, but more comments in the chat pods. I'm going to read some of these out for you, Nick. The first one is, I'm concerned that agencies could do so much more to improve roadway safety by implementing techniques published decades ago. Why is there so much foot dragging, and why such a slow process to update design policy? In spite of human errors, agencies can achieve 30 to 50% reduction in crashes by agency design improvements in policy and design. So again, that was more of a comment than a question.
No, it's a very insightful comment. And I don't have a definitive answer other than that's essentially what we're trying to achieve with this move toward a Vision Zero and the safe system approach. It's trying to get a step function, a change in thinking away from using what we've used just in the past, using things that provide quick results, providing things that may be relatively less expensive to use. All those things will only get us so far. To move to the ambitious goal of Vision Zero, we're going to need to really think differently and more long-term. The things that give us quick results also tend to give us small results. Some of the safe system approach and certainly the efforts to transform culture, we know that changing culture takes a long while. But those things that take a long time may also produce much larger effects, benefits, than some of these short-term goals. So part of what this comment relates to, I think, is the need we have to change our own internal traffic safety culture as traffic safety stakeholder organizations to lean into this idea of stepping out of our silos and collaborating, because long-term collaboration, the safe system approach, will take longer, but will give us bigger, larger effects, and so will investing and being willing to try innovative strategies that may or may not work, but if they do work over a longer period, they will be much more successful. I also want to go back, because a couple of people commented on this idea of ultimate responsibility versus responsibility as traffic safety stakeholders. And I agree with you. I'm just pointing out that within the traffic safety culture of the Swedes, they have actually embraced this idea of being ultimately responsible because they are the traffic safety stakeholders. It's no one else's job but theirs. And it is a sort of a big step to embrace that ultimate responsibility, but it sort of, I think, is used to focus and motivate themselves as in terms of seeing that they are the ones that can make a difference. And perhaps it is ultimately their responsibility to do it. But they're not just talking about the traffic safety engineers. They're talking about everyone who has some stake in traffic safety. So it's not just the traffic safety engineers in their office by themselves being ultimately responsible. It's these partnerships of all stakeholders that collectively share ultimate responsibility for traffic safety. But that is a reflection of the Swedish traffic safety culture, who do have much lower fatality risks, that they were willing to take that big step forward to move from some responsibility to ultimate responsibility. Sort of a philosophical difference.
So Nick, we do have two more quick questions for you before we go ahead and close out the webinar. The first one is, have there been surveys of agencies to see if there is disagreement with that safe system principle number 3, that designers are responsible?
Yes, we at the center have created a tool that lets any stakeholder agency examine their internal traffic safety culture And part of that captures level of agreement across the organization with these assumptions. We've done some of this work with a couple of state DOTs, but we're certainly happy to partner with any agency who would be interested in us working with you to see what level of consistency and agreement you have within your agency and give you some indication of what current level of traffic safety culture you may have.
And this kind of goes along with that to the next question. Can we have an incomplete foundation and still build the framework to move forward to our target?
Yes, they can move in. You sort of have to have a critical level to make people buy in enough to make the effort to move forward. And then as you're moving forward with the safe system approach, you can continue to grow your internal traffic safety culture. Indeed, your successes, your short-term successes with the safe system approach actually feeds the growth of your own internal traffic safety culture. So once you reach a critical level, they go hand in hand.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nic. We're going to go ahead and close out the webinar now. So to achieve our webinar goal, we hope that you've learned today to list the 6 principles and 5 elements of the safe system approach, to describe how the safe system approach is different from traditional road safety approaches, to describe how you and your agency can begin today to plan and implement safe system concepts to improve safety on rural roads, to understand the meaning of traffic safety culture, and to recognize the role of traffic safety culture in the safe system approach in Vision Zero. So I do want to mention that this was a 6-part series, so the next part will be Safe Road Users, and that will be on Wednesday, July 28th. We will be sending out the registration for that very soon. August will be on Safe Vehicles, September on Safe Speeds, October on Safe Roads, and November on Post-Crash Care. As always, these are recorded and available on our website as well. And I do want to make you all aware as well that we are having the 2nd year of Rural Road Safety Awareness Week. It will be held July 19th through the 23rd, and we hope that you'll all participate in that. Our theme for the week is Live, Work, and Explore along the Rural Road to Zero, and each of the days that week will focus on a different one of these safe system elements. So you can check out our website. There is a link under our news and events to Rural Road Safety Awareness Week. We also do have it on our homepage in the scrolling box across the top to make it easy for you to get to. We will be releasing some example social media and infographics here within the next couple weeks that can be used on July 19th, and you're also welcome to share them from our social media as well. If you have any questions related to today's presentation, here again is Mark and Nic's email addresses. You can also contact us at the Rural Safety Center, and we can put you in touch with Mark and Nic as well. We thank you all for joining us today. And Mark and Nic, I do want to thank you again for kicking off our Safe System Approach for Rural Areas webinar presentation series. We love having the 2 of you come speak to our audiences, especially with the expertise you have in both of these areas. So thank you so much.